The Lost Recipes, a medieval culinary sleep journey. Picture yourself in the warm glow of a medieval kitchen hearth where embers cast dancing shadows on stone walls and the lingering scents of rosemary and thyme drift through the evening air. Tonight, we shall journey through the castle kitchens and monastery gardens of old Europe, following the aromatic trails of recipes that were never shared, dishes that existed only in memory, and culinary secrets that died with their creators. Written in personal journals, whispered between master and apprentice, yet destined to remain forever untasted. Some were perfected in royal kitchens but never recorded. Others were created by humble cooks who lacked the means to preserve their innovations. Still others were lost when their creators took vows of silence or fled in times of war. In this age of grand feasts and Lenten fasts, when the preparation of food was both necessity and art, every recipe carried the wisdom of generations alongside the innovation of individual cooks. Spices traveled thousands of miles to reach European tables. Monasteries cultivated herbs with medicinal properties, and castle kitchens transformed simple ingredients into displays of wealth and power. But not all culinary knowledge survived. Let us now drift through their flavorful stories, as gentle as the steam rising from a simmering pot on a winter evening. Imagine yourself walking through the herb garden of the Abbey of St. Gall, where the morning dew still clings to leaves of sage and mint. The year is 1098, and Brother Benedictus, the monastery's head cook, tends his garden with the devotion of a priest caring for his flock. For 30 years he has been perfecting a recipe for what he calls panis angelicus, angel's bread, a loaf so light and aromatic that pilgrims claim it provides not just nourishment, but spiritual sustenance. The secret lies in his careful cultivation of a wild yeast culture, fed with honey from the monastery's beehives and water from a sacred spring. He adds herbs in precise combinations that change with the liturgical seasons, creating bread that tastes of Easter lilies in spring and Christmas pine in winter. But Brother Benedictus, following his vow of humility, has never written down the recipe, sharing it only with his assistant, young Brother Thomas. When plague strikes the monastery, both monks fall ill within days of each other. Brother Benedictus whispers the recipe's final secrets to Thomas with his dying breath, but the young monk's fever-addled mind cannot retain the precise measurements. The recipe dies with them, leaving only the memory of pilgrims who still speak of bread that tasted like paradise. The firelight flickers as we drift to the kitchen of Château de Vincennes, where Maître Guillaume serves as head cook to the court of King Louis VII. The castle buzzes with preparation for the wedding feast of the king's daughter, and Guillaume labors over his masterpiece, a dish he calls Roses of the Seine, delicate pastries shaped like roses and filled with a mixture of ground almonds, rose water, and a secret ingredient that makes them dissolve on the tongue like morning mist. The secret is a technique he learned from a Moorish cook during the Second Crusade, a method of incorporating air into the almond paste that creates an impossibly light texture. Each pastry takes an hour to prepare, and Guillaume has been working for weeks to create enough for the wedding feast. But 3 days before the celebration, political tensions force the cancellation of the marriage alliance. The magnificent pastries, too delicate to keep, are quietly distributed to the poor of Paris, who eat them without understanding their significance. Guillaume, heartbroken at the waste of his artistry, never makes the dish again, and the technique dies with him. Feel your breathing slow as we wander into the kitchen of a prosperous merchant's house in the Flemish city of Bruges, where Mistress Margaretha oversees the preparation of the family's evening meal. Unlike the grand kitchens of nobles, this is a place of careful economy and domestic warmth, where every ingredient is chosen for both flavor and cost. Margaretha has spent years perfecting a recipe for Golden Tide, a fish stew that transforms the humble herring into something worthy of the finest tables. Her secret lies in the careful balance of spices, cinnamon from Ceylon, pepper from India, and a touch of precious saffron that turns the broth golden like autumn sunshine. But more than the spices, it is her technique of slow cooking that makes the difference, allowing the flavors to meld and intensify over hours of gentle simmering. She has promised to teach the recipe to her daughter Anna, but when Anna chooses to enter a convent rather than marry, the recipe remains unshared. Margaretha, respecting her daughter's choice, takes the secret to her grave, leaving only the memory of neighbors who still speak of stews that tasted like liquid gold. The night deepens around us like a warm cloak as we drift to the monastery of Cluny, where Brother Albertus tends the infirmary and creates what he calls healing broths, soups that restore not just physical strength, but spiritual balance. His masterpiece is a broth made from 13 different herbs, each chosen for its medicinal properties and symbolic meaning. The recipe requires gathering the herbs at specific times of day and seasons of the year, following principles that blend ancient herbal wisdom with Christian symbolism. The broth is said to cure melancholy, restore vitality to the aged, and bring peaceful sleep to troubled minds. But Brother Albertus, mindful of accusations of practicing witchcraft, has never shared the complete recipe, revealing only portions to different monks. When he dies suddenly of a heart attack while gathering herbs in the forest, the complete formula dies with him. The monastery continues to make healing broths, but they lack the precise knowledge that made Albertus's creations truly miraculous. As the castle bells toll midnight, we find ourselves in the kitchen of Eleanor of Aquitaine's court, where the convergence of French and English culinary traditions creates opportunities for innovation. The head cook, Master Henri, has been working on a dish that he believes will symbolize the union of the two kingdoms. Peacock of Two Crowns, a spectacular presentation that combines the delicate French technique of his training with the heartier English flavors that his new position demands. The dish involves carefully deboning a peacock while keeping the skin intact, then stuffing it with a complex mixture of ground meats, spices, and dried fruits, before roasting it slowly and serving it with its magnificent plumage restored. The technical challenge is immense. Too much heat and the delicate skin will tear, too little and the stuffing will not cook properly. Master Henri has been experimenting for months, but before he can perfect the dish, Eleanor's marriage to Henry II creates political upheavals that scatter the court. Henri finds himself dismissed in favor of English cooks, and his unfinished masterpiece remains forever incomplete. The hours pass like whispered secrets as we drift through the kitchen of a German monastery, where Brother Wolfgang has been appointed to care for the abbey's most precious possession, a collection of wine recipes inherited from Roman times. The ancient parchments describe methods for creating wines that were said to grant visions of the divine, but the Latin text is difficult to decipher and many of the ingredients are no longer available. Wolfgang spends years experimenting, trying to recreate the nectar of the gods described in the oldest manuscript. His breakthrough comes when he realizes that the key ingredient is not a specific grape variety, but a particular type of yeast that grows only on vines in certain microclimates. After 7 years of experimentation, he produces a wine that creates a state of profound spiritual ecstasy in those who drink it. But church authorities, concerned about the wine's powerful effects, order the recipe destroyed and forbid its production. Wolfgang obeys, burning his notes and smashing his fermentation vessels. But on quiet evenings, he still tends a small secret vine whose grapes he knows could produce miracles. Feel your body growing heavy as we journey to the kitchen of a Norman castle, where Mistress Alienor serves as head cook to a lord who has spent years fighting in the Holy Land. She has been experimenting with the exotic spices and cooking techniques that returning crusaders describe, trying to recreate the flavors of the East in her Norman kitchen. Her greatest achievement is a dish she calls Memories of Damascus, a complex lamb stew that incorporates techniques learned from a Jewish cook who fled persecution in the Rhineland. The recipe requires 3 days of preparation, with the lamb marinated in wine and spices, then slow cooked with almonds, dates, and a blend of Eastern spices that must be ground fresh each morning. The result is a dish that tastes like the Orient itself, transporting diners to the markets of Constantinople and the gardens of Cordoba. But when anti-Semitic violence erupts in the region, Eleanor's association with Jewish cooking techniques becomes dangerous. She stops making the dish and never teaches it to anyone, preferring to let it die rather than risk accusations of harboring forbidden knowledge. The abbey bell tolls in the distance as we visit the kitchen of a Benedictine convent, where Sister Marguerite creates what she calls bread of sorrows, a dark, dense loaf that she bakes for the community during Lent. The recipe is her own creation, incorporating techniques she learned from her grandmother, who survived the famine of 1033, by knowing how to make nutritious bread from whatever ingredients were available. Sister Marguerite's bread includes ground acorns, dried herbs, and a small amount of honey that transforms bitter ingredients into something almost sweet. The bread provides not just sustenance but comfort during the harsh weeks of Lenten fasting, and visiting pilgrims often speak of how it seemed to ease their spiritual struggles as well as their hunger. But Sister Marguerite, following her vow of poverty, considers the recipe a gift from God that should not be hoarded. She teaches it to several novices, but when the convent is dissolved during a period of religious reform, the sisters scatter to different communities and the recipe is lost in the chaos of displacement. As dawn approaches but still seems far away, we find ourselves in the kitchen of a Venetian merchant's palace, where East meets West in both spice and technique. The cook, Maestro Antonio, has spent his life perfecting dishes that reflect Venice's position as the gateway between Europe and the East. His masterpiece is Golden Sunset, a dish of saffron rice that incorporates techniques learned from Arabic cooks, Byzantine traditions, and his own innovations. The recipe requires perfect timing, The rice must be cooked to precise doneness, while a complex sauce of saffron, almonds, and rose water is prepared separately and combined at the exact moment when the flavors will achieve perfect harmony. Antonio has been working on this dish for 15 years and has finally achieved perfection. But Venice's political situation becomes increasingly unstable, and when war threatens the city, Antonio flees to the mainland with his family. In the chaos of evacuation, his recipe notes are lost, and by the time he returns to Venice years later, his memory of the precise techniques has faded. He spends his remaining years trying to recreate his masterpiece, but never quite recaptures the perfection he once achieved. Your breathing has found its natural rhythm now, slow and deep, as we drift to the kitchen of a Welsh castle, where the cook combines Celtic traditions with Norman innovations. Master Gwyn has been developing a dish that honors both cultures: salmon of the Blessed Isles, a preparation that involves curing salmon with sea salt and herbs from the Welsh mountains, then smoking it over fires of sacred oak. The technique requires knowledge of both the ancient Celtic traditions of his ancestors and the sophisticated preservation methods introduced by the Normans. The result is salmon that tastes like the sea itself, with undertones of mountain herbs and the mysterious flavor that comes from smoking over oak that has been blessed by druids. But the political tensions between Welsh and Norman cultures make such fusion dangerous. Master Gwyn's loyalties are questioned by both sides, and he is forced to flee when accusations of practicing pagan rituals make his position untenable. He takes his knowledge with him into exile, but dies before he can pass it on to a new generation. The abbey bell tolls lauds as we visit the kitchen of a Sicilian monastery, where Brother Francesco creates dishes that reflect the island's unique position at the crossroads of Christian, Islamic, and Jewish cultures. His specialty is honey of three faiths, a complex dessert that incorporates Christian symbolism, Islamic culinary techniques, and Jewish dietary laws. The dish begins with honey collected from hives that feed on orange blossoms, almonds, and wild herbs that grow on Mount Etna. This honey is combined with almonds ground according to Jewish kashrut laws, shaped using Islamic geometric patterns, and blessed according to Christian ritual. The result is a sweet that tastes like Sicily itself, complex, multicultural, and touched with the divine. But the monastery's new abbot, appointed from Rome, views such cultural mixing as dangerous to Christian purity. Brother Francesco is ordered to cease making the dish and to destroy his notes. He obeys publicly, but secretly teaches the recipe to a young Jewish merchant who has shown kindness to the monastery. However, when persecution forces the Jewish community to flee Sicily, the recipe leaves with them, never to return. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peaceful rest as we drift through the kitchen of a French manor house, where the cook has been experimenting with a dish inspired by the troubadour songs of courtly love. Mistress Isabel creates Love's Sweet Torment, a dessert that is meant to represent the bittersweet nature of romantic passion. The recipe combines honey and bitter herbs in precise proportions, creating a confection that begins sweet on the tongue but develops complex, slightly bitter undertones that linger long after eating. The technique requires heating the honey to exactly the right temperature while incorporating the herbs at the precise moment when their essential oils will blend rather than separate. Isabel has been perfecting this dish for her lord's courtship of a neighboring lady, planning to serve it at the betrothal feast. But when the lady chooses another suitor, the heartbroken lord forbids any mention of love in his household. Isabel's creation becomes a painful reminder of hopes unfulfilled, and she never makes it again, taking the recipe to her grave along with her memories of better times. In the quiet hours before dawn, we find ourselves in the monastery kitchen of Saint Denis, where Brother Anselm has been working on what he calls bread of the resurrection, a loaf that he bakes only during the Easter season. The recipe incorporates eggs in a way that symbolizes rebirth, with a technique that creates bread with a golden interior that seems to glow when broken open. The secret lies in his method of incorporating beaten eggs with honey and saffron into the dough at precisely the right moment, creating a texture that is both rich and light. But more than technique, it is Brother Anselm's spiritual preparation that makes the bread special. He fasts for 3 days before baking, praying continuously while kneading the dough. Pilgrims who taste his Easter bread report visions of angels and feelings of profound peace. However, when Brother Anselm dies during the plague that sweeps through France, he takes his spiritual techniques with him. Other monks attempt to recreate his bread using his written recipe, but without his spiritual preparation, the bread, while good, lacks the transcendent quality that made it legendary. The night is deepest now, and we drift to the kitchen of an English manor, where Lady Gwyneth, despite her noble birth, personally oversees the creation of a dish that could feed both body and soul during the harsh winter months. Her comfort of angels is a hearty soup that combines root vegetables from her manor's gardens with herbs that she grows in her private medicinal garden. The recipe requires slow cooking over 3 days, with ingredients added in a specific sequence that builds layers of flavor. But the true secret is her addition of a tea made from herbs that she learned about from an elderly woman accused of witchcraft, whom Lady Gwyneth secretly protected and sheltered. The herbs create a subtle effect that eases melancholy and brings peaceful sleep to troubled minds. When accusations of witchcraft begin to include Lady Gwyneth herself, she destroys her herb garden and burns her recipe notes to protect herself and her family. The knowledge dies with the old woman she once protected, leaving only the memory of soups that could heal more than hunger. As the hours flow like honey through the darkness, we find ourselves in the scriptorium of a monastery, where Brother Thomas, the librarian, has been collecting and preserving recipes not just for food, but for the inks and pigments used in illuminated manuscripts. His greatest discovery is a recipe for celestial blue, a pigment made from lapis lazuli that has been treated with a secret process that makes it seem to glow with inner light. While not technically a food recipe, Brother Thomas applies culinary techniques to his pigment preparation, using methods of grinding, heating, and combining that he learned from watching the monastery cooks. His blue ink seems to capture the very essence of heaven, making the illuminated letters appear to float above the parchment. But lapis lazuli is more precious than gold, and the monastery's finances cannot support such extravagance. Brother Thomas is ordered to use cheaper pigments, and his notes on the celestial blue process are locked away as an impossible luxury. The technique is forgotten, and future illuminators can only wonder at the surviving manuscripts that seem to glow with divine light. In the workshop of a Parisian apothecary, Master Guillaume combines his knowledge of medicine with culinary arts to create Elixir of Youth, a cordial that he claims can restore vitality to the aged and strengthen the constitution of the weak. The recipe requires rare herbs imported from the East, combined with honey, wine, and a secret ingredient that Guillaume will reveal only on his deathbed. The preparation takes a full lunar month, with the mixture stirred daily, while specific prayers are recited. Those who drink the elixir report renewed energy and clarity of mind, and Guillaume's reputation spreads throughout Paris. But when church authorities investigate reports of miraculous healing, they denounce his work as sorcery. Guillaume is forced to flee the city, and in his haste he leaves behind his laboratory notes. Thieves loot his workshop, destroying centuries of accumulated knowledge in their search for valuables. The recipe for his elixir dies with him in exile. The bells of distant churches toll through the misty air as we drift to the kitchen of a Lombard inn, where the innkeeper's wife has created a dish that perfectly captures the essence of hospitality. Signora Maria's traveler's welcome is a simple stew that somehow manages to taste like home to every person who eats it, regardless of where they come from. The secret lies not in exotic ingredients, but in her technique of layering familiar flavors in unexpected ways, creating a dish that awakens memories of childhood and family. She adds different herbs depending on her intuitive sense of what each traveler needs. Warming spices for those who seem cold in spirit, gentle herbs for the weary, strengthening ingredients for those who face difficult journeys ahead. But Maria's gift is more intuitive than technical, and when she tries to teach her daughter the recipe, she realizes that she cannot explain how she knows which flavors each person needs. The knowledge is too personal, too tied to her own empathetic nature to be transmitted. When Maria dies, her inn continues to serve travelers, but the stew never again has the magical quality of making everyone feel at home. Feel your consciousness floating like steam from a cooking pot as we visit the castle kitchen of a Welsh prince, where the head cook has been experimenting with a dish that could serve as both meal and medicine for warriors returning from battle. Master Cadwallan's Warrior's Restore combines red meat with herbs that he believes can heal both physical wounds and spiritual trauma. The recipe requires aging the meat in a mixture of wine and medicinal herbs for weeks before cooking, then preparing it using techniques that preserve maximum nutritional value while creating flavors that comfort the soul. Warriors who eat his dish report faster healing and fewer nightmares about their battles. But when the Welsh prince is defeated and his castle falls to Norman forces, Master Cadwallan is killed defending the kitchen that was his domain. His recipes burn with the castle, and the knowledge of healing foods dies with the last of the old Welsh nobility. In the deepest part of night, we encounter the monastery of a remote alpine valley, where Brother Johannes has spent decades perfecting Mountain's Breath, a cheese that captures the essence of high meadow flowers and crystal clear air. His technique involves not just the careful selection of milk from cows that graze on specific mountain slopes, but an aging process that takes place in caves blessed by hermit saints. The cheese that results tastes like the mountains themselves, clean, pure, and touched with something indefinably sacred. Pilgrims crossing the Alps seek out the monastery specifically to taste Brother Johannes's cheese, claiming that it provides not just nourishment, but spiritual sustenance for the difficult journey ahead. But when avalanches block the mountain passes for several consecutive winters, the monastery is cut off from the outside world. By the time the passes reopen, Brother Johannes has died of old age, and the younger monks have not fully learned his techniques. They continue to make cheese, but it lacks the transcendent quality that made their monastery famous throughout the Alpine regions. The night grows so deep it seems to have no bottom as we visit the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, where the imperial cook has been commissioned to create a dish worthy of Charlemagne's memory. Meister Heinrich labors over Crown of the Empire, a complex dish that involves 7 different meats representing the 7 electorates, prepared using techniques from across the empire and combined in a presentation that symbolizes imperial unity. The dish requires coordination between multiple kitchens, precise timing that must account for different cooking times, and presentation skills that turn the meal into political theater. Heinrich spends 2 years perfecting the dish, but when political tensions threaten to tear the empire apart, the emperor decides that such displays of unity would be mocking current realities. The dish is never served at an official function, and Heinrich, disappointed by the waste of his artistic efforts, never attempts anything so ambitious again. The recipe disappears into the imperial archives, another casualty of political instability. In a manor house kitchen in Normandy, Lady Matilda works alongside her cook to create Tapestry of Flavors, a dish inspired by the great tapestry that tells the story of her ancestors' conquest of England. Each component of the dish represents a different scene from the tapestry, with flavors that tell the story of victory, loss, and the passage of time. The preparation requires artistic skills as much as culinary ones, as each element must be shaped and colored to represent specific figures and events from the historical narrative. Lady Matilda plans to serve this dish at the anniversary celebration of the Norman conquest, but when political tensions between England and Normandy make such celebrations inappropriate, the dish is never completed. The recipes and techniques remain in Lady Matilda's private notes, but without the specific occasion that inspired them, they seem incomplete, like a story missing its ending. As the hours pass like gentle prayers, we find ourselves in the cell of a hermit monk who has discovered that solitude can be a kind of seasoning. Brother Francis lives alone on a rocky island off the coast of Scotland, sustained by fish from the sea and herbs that grow in the cracks of stone. Over the years of solitude, he has developed hermit's contentment, a simple fish stew that somehow manages to taste like a feast despite its humble ingredients. The secret lies not in complex techniques, but in the meditation and gratitude that Brother Francis brings to every aspect of preparation. He blesses each ingredient, gives thanks for each stage of cooking, and approaches the meal as a form of communion with the divine. The result is food that nourishes not just the body, but the soul, bringing profound satisfaction from the simplest ingredients. But when Brother Francis dies alone on his island, his approach to cooking dies with him. Other hermits who attempt to recreate his simple meals find only fish and herbs, lacking the spiritual dimension that transformed sustenance into sacrament. The bells ring out across the medieval landscape as we encounter the final kitchen of our journey, the cosmic kitchen where the divine cook prepares the feast that will celebrate the end of time. Here, all the lost recipes are preserved, all the forgotten techniques are remembered, all the culinary knowledge that died with its creators lives on in eternal form. The ingredients are the essence of things themselves, not just bread, but the idea of nourishment, not just wine, but the concept of celebration, not just meat, but the substance of life itself. In this ultimate kitchen, every meal becomes communion, every recipe becomes prayer, every technique becomes a form of worship. And as the abbey bells ring out across the medieval landscape, calling the faithful to their morning prayers, we understand that all cooking is alchemy. All recipes are attempts to transform the ordinary into the sacred. All meals are opportunities for communion between souls. The lost recipes we have encountered tonight are not truly forgotten, but transformed, their flavors becoming part of the eternal banquet that feeds both body and spirit. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that every meal you have ever shared in love, every dish that has brought comfort to your soul, exists somewhere in the great cookbook that began with the first human who discovered that food could be more than mere sustenance. The medieval world sleeps around us, its stone hearths cold but not forgotten, its recipes living on in the memory of tastes that once brought joy, comfort, and connection to countless souls. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the gentle bubbling of pots over ancient hearths, the soft glow of firelight in monastery kitchens, the whisper of spoons stirring broths that could heal both body and spirit. In your dreams, you may find that every lost recipe eventually finds its way to the right cook, carried not by written instructions, but by the love that transforms ingredients into nourishment, the care that makes every meal a gift, the gratitude that makes all food sacred. The medieval night embraces you now, complete and eternal, where every lost recipe becomes a prayer, every forgotten dish becomes a blessing, every cook who yearned to feed others finds peace in the great kitchen that holds all recipes, all techniques, all love that was ever stirred into food, but never shared, never tasted, but always remembered in the eternal feast that nourishes all souls. The Forgotten Songs, a medieval sleep journey. Picture yourself in the hushed twilight of a medieval cathedral where shadows dance between stone pillars and the last light of day filters through stained glass windows like liquid jewels. Tonight, we shall journey through the cobbled paths and castle halls of old Europe, following the ethereal echoes of songs that were never sung, melodies that died on the lips of their creators, and harmonies that exist only in the silence between heartbeats, composed by trembling hands on parchment, hummed in solitary chambers, yet destined to remain forever unheard. Some were written in monastery cells but never reached the choir. Others were crafted for royal courts but lost their moment. Still others were born in the hearts of common folk but silenced by fear or sorrow. In this age of troubadours and traveling minstrels, when music carried the very soul of a people across mountain passes and through deep forests, every song was both prayer and memory, each melody a bridge between the earthly and divine. But not all songs found their voice. Let us now drift through their silent stories, as gentle as evening mist rolling across the hills of Tuscany. Imagine yourself walking through the narrow streets of medieval Cluny, where the ancient abbey rises like a stone prayer against the starlit sky. The year is 1147, and in the scriptorium dedicated to musical notation, Brother Anselm sits hunched over sheets of vellum, his quill scratching out neumes that dance across the page like tiny birds. He composes a new sequence for the Feast of All Saints, a melody that came to him in a dream, flowing like honey through his sleeping mind. The notes speak of the communion between the living and the dead, of voices that transcend the boundaries of time. But when he presents his work to the choirmaster, the old man shakes his head gravely. Too bold, he whispers, too strange for our traditional worship. The parchment disappears into the archives, its melody existing only in Brother Anselm's memory, hummed sometimes in the pre-dawn darkness of his cell. The candle flame flickers as we drift further into the medieval night, carrying us to the court of Duke William IX of Aquitaine, the first known troubadour, where his granddaughter Eleanor hosts a gathering of poets and musicians. Among them sits Cercamon, a young musician whose fingers tremble as he holds a sheet of music he has labored over for months. It is a canso, a love song of such exquisite beauty that it could make angels weep, dedicated to a lady whose name he dare not speak. The melody interweaves like lovers' hands, rising and falling with the rhythm of a passionate heart. But when his moment comes to perform, he sees her husband's dark eyes watching from across the hall, and fear seizes his throat. The song remains unsung, its notes scattered like autumn leaves by his trembling hands. Feel your breathing slow as we wander deeper into medieval Europe, where the autumn wind carries the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves. In the German city of Mainz, Meister Heinrich der Teichner sits in his workshop surrounded by the tools of his craft, lutes, viols, and psalters in various stages of completion. But tonight his hands craft something different, a complex polyphonic piece that weaves together the ancient Germanic melodies of his childhood with the sophisticated harmonies he learned in Paris. The music speaks of the meeting point between old and new, between the pagan past and Christian present. Each voice in the composition tells its own story while joining in perfect harmony with the others. But such musical complexity is viewed with suspicion by church authorities who see danger in music that might distract from pure worship. His composition remains locked in his workshop chest, its harmonies existing only in the silence of his solitary evenings. The night deepens around us like a velvet embrace as we drift to the convent of Rupertsberg, where the visionary Hildegard of Bingen walks the moonlit cloisters, her mind filled with melodies that flow directly from her mystical experiences. She hears the songs of angels, the harmony of the spheres, the very music that God used to create the world. Her Ordo Virtutum, a musical drama of a soul's journey, echoes in her mind with such clarity that she can see the notes as points of light dancing in the darkness. But when she attempts to teach these celestial melodies to her sisters, she finds that human voices cannot quite capture the ethereal quality she perceives. The songs remain partially earthbound, their full beauty existing only in the realm of her visions. As the abbey bell tolls across the sleeping countryside, we find ourselves in the court of Alfonso X of Castile, where Muslim, Christian, and Jewish musicians gathered to create the Cantigas de Santa Maria. Among them sits Yusuf ibn Hakim, a Moorish musician whose oud carries melodies that remember the gardens of Cordoba and the fountains of Granada. He composes a cantiga that blends Islamic melodic patterns with Christian devotional themes, creating a musical bridge between faiths. The melody speaks of the Virgin Mary in the language of Andalusian love poetry, finding the sacred in the profane and the universal in the particular. But political tensions make such cultural fusion dangerous, and his composition is deemed too controversial for the royal collection. It exists only in his private performances, sung to the shadows of his chamber. The hours pass like whispered prayers as we drift through the misty hills of Wales, where the last of the ancient bards preserves the musical traditions of his people. Gwion ap Sinan sits by his harp in a remote mountain cave, his fingers picking out melodies that have been passed down through countless generations. But he also composes new songs, weaving together the old stories with his own visions of prophecy and loss. His greatest work is a musical cycle that tells the entire history of his people, from the mists of legend to the harsh reality of Norman conquest. Each song connects to the next, like links in an unbreakable chain, creating a musical memory that could preserve Welsh culture for all time. But the political situation makes performing such nationalist music treasonous, and his cycle remains unheard except by the wind that moans through the mountain passes. Feel your body growing heavy as we journey to the bustling port city of Venice, where east meets west in a symphony of languages and melodies. Maria della Scala, one of the few female composers of her time, sits in her private chamber overlooking the Grand Canal, crafting motets that incorporate the Byzantine chants she learned from Greek merchants. Her music speaks of the mystery of the Incarnation through melodies that seem to bridge heaven and earth, using harmonic progressions that won't be discovered by music theorists for another century. But as a woman, she cannot have her compositions performed in the great churches or courts. They remain in her private collection, their revolutionary harmonies known only to her confessor, who sometimes hums them while saying his own prayers. The night wind carries us to the monastery of St. Gall, where Brother Notker Balbulus creates his sequences, elaborate musical settings for the Mass that transform the liturgy into pure poetry. His latest work is a sequence for Easter that captures the entire drama of resurrection in a single, soaring melody. The music begins in the darkness of the tomb and ascends through phrase after phrase until it seems to break free of earthly gravity entirely. Each neum on the parchment represents not just a note, but a theological insight, making the sequence both musical composition and spiritual treatise. But the work is so complex and demanding that no choir in his lifetime can perform it adequately. It waits in the monastery library, its full glory reserved for future generations. As dawn approaches but still seems far away, we find ourselves in the court of the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, that wonder of the world who speaks 9 languages and patronizes scholars and artists from across the known world. His court musician, Johannes de Groscheo, composes a motet that attempts to unite all the musical traditions of the empire, German Minnesang, French trouvère songs, Italian laude, and even elements of Arabic maqam. The resulting composition is breathtakingly ambitious, a musical map of the medieval world that demonstrates how different cultures can create harmony without losing their distinct voices. But the work is perhaps too ahead of its time, too complex for audiences who prefer simpler, more familiar melodies. It receives only one performance before being filed away in the imperial archives. Your breathing has found its natural rhythm now, slow and deep, as we drift to the scriptorium of the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris, where the greatest composers of the Ars Antiqua create the first true polyphonic masterpieces. Léonin and Perrotin have revolutionized sacred music, but their young student, Master Albertus, dreams of pushing the boundaries even further. His composition interweaves four independent melodic lines, each telling its own version of the nativity story, creating a musical texture so rich and complex that listeners report seeing visions while hearing it. But church authorities worry that such elaborate polyphony distracts from the words of the liturgy, making music more important than prayer. Albertus's masterpiece is performed only once, in secret, for a small group of fellow musicians who swear never to speak of what they heard. The abbey bell tolls lauds in the distance as we visit the castle of Blanche of Castile, where the Queen Mother maintains a court renowned for its cultivation of the arts. Her court composer, Pierre de la Croix, creates motets that reflect the political and spiritual concerns of his time, setting Latin sacred texts alongside French secular poems in complex rhythmic patterns that mirror the tensions of earthly and heavenly love. His greatest work is a motet celebrating the return of King Louis IX from the Crusades. But when news arrives of the king's capture and imprisonment, the celebratory piece becomes suddenly inappropriate. It remains unperformed, its triumphant melodies transformed into laments by the cruelty of history. Feel yourself sinking deeper into peaceful rest as we drift through the halls of the University of Oxford, where young scholars debate not only theology and philosophy, but also the mathematical principles underlying musical harmony. Master John of London composes theoretical treatises that are also musical compositions, pieces that demonstrate the relationship between numerical ratios and beautiful sound. His most ambitious work is a motet based entirely on the mathematical principles of the golden ratio, creating a piece that is simultaneously a song and a geometric proof. But such abstract mathematical music proves too challenging for contemporary audiences who prefer melody to mathematical elegance. The composition exists more as intellectual exercise than performed reality. In the quiet hours before dawn, we find ourselves in a remote Scottish abbey, where Brother Columba transcribes the ancient Gaelic melodies that the Celtic monks brought to this northern land centuries ago. But he does more than preserve. He creates new hymns that blend Christian theology with the haunting modal scales of his ancestors. His Easter sequence incorporates the pentatonic scales that echo across highland glens, creating a sound that is both deeply rooted in place and timelessly spiritual. However, the Roman liturgical reforms require standardized melodies, and his Celtic variations are deemed inappropriate for official use. They survive only in his private manuscript, sung sometimes by the brothers when they think no one is listening. The night is deepest now, and we drift to the workshop of a Parisian instrument maker who is also a composer, crafting pieces specifically designed to showcase the capabilities of his new instruments. Master Guillaume creates a piece for his revolutionary improvement to the organistrum, the hurdy-gurdy, that demonstrates the instrument's ability to create both melody and drone simultaneously. The composition tells the story of a pilgrim's journey to Santiago de Compostela, with the drone representing the constant presence of faith, while the melody traces the various adventures and spiritual insights encountered along the way. But the piece requires such technical mastery that few musicians can perform it, and it remains a curiosity in his workshop, played only when potential customers need convincing of his instrument's superiority. As the hours pass like gentle waves upon a distant shore, we visit the chamber of a Norman trouvère who composes chansons de geste that celebrate not the great deeds of famous heroes, but the quiet courage of ordinary people. His cycle tells the story of a village that survives plague, famine, and war through the simple expedient of caring for one another. Each song in the cycle focuses on a different character: the baker who shares his last loaf, the healer who tends the sick without thought of payment, the mother who finds hope in the laughter of children. The music is deliberately simple, designed to be sung by common people rather than professional musicians. But the nobles who might sponsor such a work prefer grander themes, and the common people he celebrates lack the means to support a professional composer. His cycle remains unheard except in his own performances for small village audiences. In the deep hours of night, we find ourselves in the scriptorium of a monastery in the Black Forest, where Brother Erasmus creates musical settings for the mystical poetry of his time. His latest work sets the visions of Meister Eckhart to music, creating compositions that attempt to capture in sound the experience of the soul's union with God. The music abandons traditional melodic patterns, instead following the rhythm of mystical experience. Long periods of contemplative silence broken by ecstatic bursts of complex polyphony. The effect is unlike anything in the musical tradition, more like overhearing a conversation between the soul and its creator. But such radical departures from musical convention are viewed with the same suspicion as the mystical theology that inspires them. The compositions remain in Brother Erasmus's cell, their revolutionary sounds known only to the stones. The bells of distant churches toll through the misty air as we drift to the court of the Duke of Burgundy, where the intersection of French and Flemish cultures creates a unique musical flowering. The court composer, Master Johannes, creates polytextual motets that layer Latin liturgical texts with French courtly poetry and Flemish folk melodies, creating compositions that speak simultaneously to the sacred and secular aspects of medieval life. His masterpiece is a motet for the wedding of the Duke's daughter that incorporates melodies from her childhood lullabies alongside sophisticated theological commentary on the nature of love, both human and divine. But the political marriage is called off at the last moment, and the celebratory motet becomes a poignant reminder of hopes unfulfilled. It is never performed, its complex layers of meaning preserved only in manuscript. Feel your consciousness floating like incense in a cathedral as we visit the workshop of a German Meistersinger who composes songs that follow the strict rules of his guild while secretly incorporating innovations that push against traditional boundaries. Master Heinrich creates a Meisterlied that tells the story of the Grail quest using the approved bar form, but his melody incorporates subtle chromaticism that creates an otherworldly atmosphere entirely appropriate to his mystical subject. The song requires not just technical skill, but spiritual insight to perform properly, as the chromatic passages must be sung with perfect intonation to create their magical effect. But such innovations are viewed with suspicion by the conservative guild masters, and his song remains unsung at official competitions, performed only in the privacy of his workshop for fellow seekers of musical truth. In the scriptorium of a monastery in Tuscany, Brother Francesco composes laude that are designed to be sung by the growing movement of lay religious enthusiasts who follow the example of St. Francis. His music is deliberately simple, using pentatonic scales and repetitive patterns that make the songs easy to learn and remember. But within this apparent simplicity lies sophisticated understanding of how music can induce spiritual states, with subtle rhythmic variations that mirror the breathing patterns of contemplative prayer. His greatest cycle sets the canticle of the sun to music, creating a sonic equivalent to Francis's vision of the unity of all creation. However, church authorities worry about lay people becoming too independent in their spiritual practices, and his compositions are deemed too encouraging of unsupervised religious enthusiasm. They remain in the monastery archives, their democratic spirituality waiting for a more tolerant age. The night deepens like a well of stars as we drift to the court of the King of France, where the royal chapel maintains the most sophisticated musical establishment in Europe. The maître de chapelle composes a grand Te Deum for the king's return from crusade, incorporating multiple choirs positioned throughout the cathedral to create an effect of heavenly voices surrounding the earthly congregation. The composition requires precise timing and exceptional acoustic understanding, as the various choirs must coordinate their entries despite being separated by hundreds of feet and multiple reverb patterns. The work receives a single stunning performance that moves the entire court to tears, but the logistical complexity makes repetition nearly impossible. It exists more as memory than as repeatable musical experience. As the hours flow like honey through the darkness, we find ourselves in the study of a Jewish cantor in the community of Troy, where Rashi's scholarship has made the city a center of Jewish learning. The cantor composes new settings for ancient Hebrew texts, creating melodies that preserve traditional prayer modes while incorporating the musical innovations he hears in the surrounding Christian culture. His setting of Kol Nidra uses harmonic progressions learned from his study of Christian polyphony, but applied to the ancient Aramaic text with such sensitivity that the result seems to emerge naturally from the words themselves. However, the conservative elements in his community view any musical innovation as dangerous departure from tradition, while the Christian authorities suspect Jewish musical practices of containing hidden meanings. His compositions remain within the Jewish community, their beauty known only to those who share his dual heritage of ancient tradition and contemporary innovation. In the workshop of a Flemish bell founder, Master Godfried composes not for voices or instruments, but for the bronze bells that will ring across the countryside for centuries to come. His carillons are tuned according to mathematical principles that create harmonic intervals when the bells ring together, transforming every call to prayer into a complex musical composition. His masterpiece is a set of bells for the Cathedral of Bruges, tuned so precisely that their harmonic overtones create phantom melodies that seem to hang in the air long after the bronze voices fall silent. But the guild secrets of bell tuning are closely guarded, and his innovations die with him, leaving only the bells themselves as testimony to musical possibilities that future generations will have to rediscover. The abbey bells toll matins in the far distance as we visit the cell of a Carthusian monk whose vow of silence has led him to develop an interior musical life of extraordinary richness. Brother Anselm composes elaborate polyphonic pieces entirely in his mind, never writing them down or sharing them with others. His mental compositions grow more complex over the years of silence, developing into vast symphonic structures that exist only in his consciousness. His greatest work is a musical setting of the entire Bible, with different instrumental timbres representing different books and complex contrapuntal relationships illustrating theological connections between Old and New Testaments. But this music of pure thought remains forever unheard, known only to God and the angels who, the monk believes, sometimes join him in his silent performances. Feel yourself settling into the deepest rest as we visit the chamber of a Spanish mystic who composes not music, but the theoretical frameworks that will guide musical composition for centuries to come. Alfonso el Sabio's court musician, Johannes de Garlandia, writes treatises that establish the mathematical relationships underlying musical beauty, but his theoretical insights lead him to compose pieces that won't be understood for another 200 years. His experiments with what later ages will call chromatic harmony create musical colors that seem to paint emotions directly onto the listener's soul. But his contemporaries lack the theoretical framework to understand what he has discovered, and his compositions remain as puzzling as they are beautiful, waiting for music theory to catch up with musical intuition. In the final hours before dawn, we drift through the merchant quarters of Florence, where the growing prosperity of the Italian city-states begins to create new opportunities for musical patronage. A young composer, Magister Petrus, creates madrigals that celebrate not religious themes, but the beauty of earthly love and the changing seasons. His music incorporates the complex rhythmic patterns he learned from studying Arabic mathematical treatises, creating compositions that seem to dance with mathematical precision while expressing the most human emotions. But the secular nature of his work puts him at odds with church authorities, while his mathematical complexity mystifies audiences who prefer simpler pleasures. His madrigals remain in manuscript, their innovative fusion of intellectual rigor and emotional expression, waiting for the Renaissance to create audiences capable of appreciating their sophistication. The night grows so deep it seems to have no bottom as we visit the court of the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople, where the last echoes of ancient Greek musical theory blend with the emerging polyphonic traditions of Western Europe. The court composer Johannes Cantacuzenos creates liturgical works that incorporate the mathematical principles of Greek music theory with the harmonic innovations of Latin polyphony. His divine liturgy uses microtonal intervals derived from ancient Greek treatises to create harmonic colors unknown in Western music, producing an otherworldly effect that listeners describe as hearing the music of angels. But the fall of Constantinople scatters his manuscripts across Europe, where Western musicians lack the theoretical background to understand his notational system. His music becomes a tantalizing mystery, its revolutionary insights lost to history. In the deepest part of night, we encounter the songs that were never composed at all, the melodies that existed only in the dreams of sleeping musicians, the harmonies that almost formed in the minds of composers who died too young, the rhythms that pulsed in the hearts of those who never learned to read musical notation. These unborn songs drift through the medieval night like spirits seeking incarnation, their potential beauty known only to the divine composer who hears all possible melodies simultaneously. And as the abbey bells ring out across the medieval landscape, calling the faithful to their morning prayers, we understand that all music is prayer, all melody is an attempt to capture the inexpressible, all harmony a glimpse of the cosmic order that underlies apparent chaos. The forgotten songs we have encountered tonight are not truly lost, but transformed, their unheard melodies becoming part of the eternal symphony that plays behind the visible world. Rest now, dear listener, knowing that every song you have ever hummed to yourself, every melody that has moved your heart, exists somewhere in the great composition that began with the music of the spheres and will continue until the final silence. The medieval world sleeps around us, its stone walls and wooden shutters covering the dreams of countless souls who heard melodies that no earthly instrument could reproduce, who composed songs that only angels could sing. Sleep now, and let your dreams be filled with the gentle scratching of quills on musical parchment, the soft glow of candles in monastery scriptoriums, the whisper of voices practicing melodies that exist nowhere else in the world. In your dreams, you may find that every forgotten song eventually finds its voice, carried not by earthly performers, but by the wind that carries all melodies, the silence that holds all possible sounds, the love that makes all music sacred. The medieval night embraces you now, complete and eternal, where every forgotten song becomes a prayer, every unheard melody becomes a blessing, every heart that yearned to create music finds its peace in the great silence that holds all compositions, all dreams, all love that was ever sung but never heard, never performed, but always, always remembered in the eternal song that plays behind the stars.